The moment police bust a gang smuggling £200 million of cocaine, on the surface, it looked like just another shipment of fruit, 41 pallets of bananas shipped from Colombia and delivered to a warehouse in North London. Nothing unusual, nothing to raise suspicion. But inside those crates was one of the biggest cocaine hauls the UK had ever seen. By the time the shipment reached Tottenham, the drugs were already gone. Border officers had intercepted the consignment days earlier. 2.3 tons of high-purity cocaine with a street value of up to £200 million. What they left behind was bait. A silent sting, carefully laid to catch the gang responsible. The men behind it had gone to extreme lengths to stay hidden. They used a real company, Agro Food Limited, as cover. They wore high-vis jackets, installed tinted security glass, and ran their warehouse like any other food importer. But behind that front was an international trafficking network, organized, well-funded, and deeply embedded. At the center was Petko Jutev, a Bulgarian national who had only just arrived in the UK. He wasn't just a warehouse manager, he was the key link between the Colombian source and the UK market. Around him, a tight circle of Albanian and Italian nationals handled transport, logistics, and security. What police uncovered wasn't just a one-off smuggling job, it was a carefully built supply chain, designed to move cocaine across the UK, box by box, under the cover of everyday business. And it very nearly worked. The operation was calculated, confident, and completely illegal. At its core was Petko Jutev, a 39-year-old Bulgarian national who had arrived in the UK just weeks earlier, but he hadn't come to find work or build a new life. He came with a purpose. By the end of December 2020, Jutev had installed himself as director of Agro Food Ltd, a legitimate fruit import business based on the Crispin Industrial Estate in Edmonton, North London. On paper, it was just another supplier bringing in bananas from overseas, but behind closed doors, it had been turned into a front for one of the UK's largest ever cocaine trafficking plots. The setup was slick. Cold storage units were installed in the warehouse, giving the impression that Agro Food was serious about preserving fresh produce. Laminated glass was fitted to stop anyone from seeing inside. Forklifts were brought in, and workers wore high-vis jackets, every detail meticulously chosen to make the warehouse look like any other small food business operating in North London. But there was nothing ordinary about what was happening behind that roller shutter. The plan was simple. Use Agro Food as a landing point for high-purity Colombian cocaine, hidden inside crates of bananas. The supply chain began in Turbo, a well-known port city on Colombia's Caribbean coast, and a key hub for cartel shipments. From there, the drugs were carefully loaded, 2,331-kilo blocks of cocaine, packed inside 41 banana pallets, each stamped with different symbols. These weren't just markings, they were identifiers, used by cartels to mark which criminal group each block belonged to once the shipment reached Europe. The gang believed their cover was strong. The company looked legitimate, the paperwork checked out, and the transport route from South America to the UK had already been tested through earlier dummy shipments. Everything pointed to success. But what they didn't know was that British authorities were already watching. Acting on intelligence gathered by the National Crime Agency, NCA, and the Organised Crime Partnership, OCP, Border Force officers intercepted the cargo at Portsmouth International Port in mid-February 2021. What they found stunned even experienced agents. 4 of the banana pallets contained layer upon layer of vacuum-packed cocaine bricks, tightly wrapped, pure, and ready for the streets. The total weight? Over 2.3 tons. On the street, it could have fetched up to £200 million, but instead of making immediate arrests, the NCA made a call. Let it run. The cocaine was removed. Listening devices were placed inside the crates. Then, 2 undercover officers posing as drivers delivered the altered shipment to Agro Food in North London. The trap was set. The gang still thought their biggest payday was inside those boxes, but the clock was ticking and the countdown had already begun. February 18th, 2021. In the grey sprawl of Edmonton's Crispin industrial estate, 2 lorries rolled quietly onto the yard of Agro Food Linteed. It was a cold, still morning, nothing out of the ordinary. But for the officers watching from a distance, this was the moment they had been building towards for weeks. Inside the warehouse, everything looked normal. Fluorescent lighting buzzed, forklifts idled, and standing at the center of it all was Petko Zhutev. He moved with purpose, directing the drivers, checking paperwork, and guiding the lorries into position. To anyone passing by, it was just another day at a North London fruit importer. But Zhutev had no idea that the biggest delivery of his life had already been intercepted. The 41 banana pallets he was signing for didn't contain cocaine. They held nothing but regular bananas and covert listening devices, installed days earlier by Border Force officers at Portsmouth. Inside the warehouse, 2 of his closest associates, György Diko and Bruno Cucci, immediately began work. Wearing high-vis jackets, they began unloading the pallets with speed and precision, but they weren't looking for fruit. They were trying to identify the crates that, just days earlier, should have been filled with bricks of high-purity cocaine. They checked batch numbers, turned boxes, whispered instructions to each other, all of it captured by hidden microphones. Outside, a specialist unit of armed officers from the Metropolitan Police waited in silence. As the 2 men grew increasingly frantic, breaking down pallets and ripping open boxes, the order was given. The raid was live. Armed officers stormed the warehouse using power tools to breach the doors. Within seconds, the operation unraveled. Zhutev, Diko, and Cucci were arrested on the spot. The officers moved quickly through the unit, securing the area and recovering key evidence, including a loaded Turkish Özkurşun revolver stashed in a ceiling girder above the pallet racks. It was a stark warning. The gang hadn't just planned to smuggle cocaine, they were prepared to protect it by force if necessary. Meanwhile, 2 more men were watching from nearby. Olsi Abeja sat behind the wheel of a hire van, positioned in clear view of the warehouse. His job was simple. Wait for the call, load up the cocaine and drive it out. But the call never came. A short distance away, Eric Mucci, the gang's UK organizer, kept a low profile, overseeing operations from the shadows. Both fled the scene once the raid began, but their freedom didn't last long. In the weeks that followed, investigators tracked them down. At a flat connected to the pair, officers uncovered 37 kilograms of cocaine, drug packaging equipment, and live ammunition. The evidence was clear. This wasn't a new venture. The supply chain was already running, and it had been for some time. The sting at Agro Food had worked. The gang's biggest move had become their biggest mistake. At the heart of the banana box smuggling plot were 5 men. Each played a key role. Each knew exactly what they were there to do. Together, they formed a disciplined, structured network that operated more like a covert business unit than a street gang, carefully managing logistics, distribution, and security in one of the most ambitious cocaine importation attempts ever seen in the UK. Leading the UK side of the operation was Petko Zhutev, a 39-year-old Bulgarian national who arrived in Britain in January 2021. Just weeks after entering the country, he became the director of Agro Food Ltd, a long-standing fruit import business based in Edmonton, North London. It was a perfect cover. Jutev used his real name and genuine identity documents to establish a sense of legitimacy. Behind the scenes, he orchestrated the entire infrastructure, leasing the warehouse, coordinating with the transport company, hiring refrigeration services, and overseeing bank transactions through company accounts. But his most crucial role was communication. Throughout the plot, Jutev maintained regular contact with a shadowy figure known only as AAA, believed to be the overseas cartel contact overseeing the shipment from Colombia. If Jutev was the face of the operation, Eric Mucci was the controller. A 45-year-old Albanian national living in Hornchurch, East London, Mucci operated from the background. Described in court as a key organizer, he was responsible for logistics, equipment and personnel. He was seen attending key planning meetings, negotiating installations at the warehouse, and using Dutch-registered SIM phones to keep communications hidden. Mucci also ran a secondary operation from a flat on Caledonian Road, North London. When police searched the property, they found 33 kilograms of cocaine and drug packaging equipment, clear signs that this wasn't a one-off job. Mucci was later convicted of both importing and supplying Class A drugs. Working under Mucci's instruction was Olsi Ebeja, 40, originally from Kosovo and living in Islington. Ebeja was a key courier and lookout. He transported cash, moved encrypted phones between members, and handled surveillance during the operation. On the day of the sting, he was parked nearby in a hired van, ready to load up and disappear once the cocaine was unpacked. Inside the warehouse, 2 other men carried out the hands-on work. Bruno Cucci, 32, and Gergi Diko, 34, were both Albanian nationals with limited presence in the UK prior to their arrests. They were seen unloading the banana crates, checking codes and searching for the hidden cocaine. They wore high-vis jackets to appear like ordinary warehouse staff, but their true role was anything but. A loaded revolver was later found hidden in the rafters above their work area. Both men were convicted not only of drug importation but also of firearms offences. Together, these 5 individuals made up the UK wing of an international operation, one built to move tons of cocaine under the cover of everyday trade. But their precision and planning weren't enough. The walls were already closing in. What followed was one of the most complex drug trials seen at the Old Bailey in recent years. The courtroom was packed with evidence. Dozens of surveillance logs, encrypted mobile data, forensic samples from the warehouse, and covert audio recordings hidden inside banana boxes. It wasn't just a case of proving drugs were involved. Prosecutors needed to show each man's role in a criminal enterprise that spanned continents. Petko Jutev, the gang's UK coordinator, initially denied all involvement. He told the court he was simply running a fruit business and had no idea cocaine had been hidden among the bananas. But as the evidence piled up, including phone records, surveillance images, and his own voice captured in the warehouse, his story began to crumble. After nearly 2 months into his retrial, Jutev changed his plea to guilty. Judge Rebecca Trowler, KC, made it clear that while he hadn't sourced the cocaine himself, he had been the key player on British soil. He arranged the premises, managed payments, received the shipment, and coordinated with other gang members. For that, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Eric Mucci, described as one of the main organisers, faced even harsher consequences. Found guilty of both importing and supplying Class A drugs, Mucci was shown to be involved in more than just this shipment. He had been running a secondary operation from a flat in Caledonian Road, where police discovered 33 kilos of cocaine and packaging materials. His role in both planning and distribution marked him as central to the supply network. The judge handed him 33 years, one of the longest UK sentences for a non-violent drug offence. Olsi Ebeja, who acted as the courier and lookout, was found guilty of importation and jailed for 17 years. Though he wasn't in the warehouse, he was close by, waiting to collect the shipment. Surveillance showed he was in regular contact with Mucci during the operation. Gheorghe Dico and Bruno Cucci, the warehouse workers seen unloading pallets and searching for the cocaine, were each sentenced to 18 and 21 years respectively. Both were also convicted of firearms offences after a loaded revolver was recovered above the pallets, proof that this was a gang prepared to use violence if needed. In total, the 5 men received 116 years in prison. As Judge Trowler told the court, this wasn't a one-off. It was an organised, layered and professional criminal network, built for profit and operating in plain sight. The collapse of the Banana Box gang wasn't just the end of a smuggling operation. It was a warning shot to organised crime networks across the UK and beyond. For all their planning, for all the money spent on specialist equipment, dummy companies and encrypted phones, the gang made one fatal error. They underestimated how closely they were being watched. The seizure of 2.3 tons of cocaine didn't just stop a single shipment. It dismantled a supply chain that could have fed hundreds of street-level dealers across London and beyond. The drugs, once cut and distributed, were estimated to be worth more than £200 million on the street. That's millions of pounds in profit taken off the table and untold damage to criminal groups further down the chain. More importantly, the case exposed the methods now being used by high-level traffickers. No longer relying on back-alley handovers or high-speed car chases, today's criminals are embedding themselves in the everyday. They're buying up failing businesses, blending in with workers, and using commercial transport routes to move product with as little attention as possible. Agrofood Ltd looked like any other small import company, but behind the roller shutters, it was a nerve centre for drug distribution on an international scale. What this investigation also made clear is the level of coordination now required to bring these operations down. The joint work between Border Force, the National Crime Agency, and the Metropolitan Police was painstaking, from the intelligence gathering to the audio surveillance to the final raid in Edmonton. It was a masterclass in patience, precision, and planning. In the end, it wasn't violence or rivalry that brought this gang down. It was timing, a well-executed sting, and a team of officers who knew when to move. As Judge Trowler put it, this was an enterprise, a cold, calculated attempt to flood the UK with cocaine, hidden in plain sight. But in this case, the only thing the gang truly managed to import was their own downfall.